wear my earrings.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Which are lovely.
Thank you. I need them.
Did
My
you?
7-year-old and I make jewelry together. It's great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is such a fun time with kids to see their creativity come out.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I feel like, I hope it doesn't end. Like, our 11-year-old is still very creative, but we do different things together.
Yeah. She made her earrings with her daughter. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. All righty.
You tell the last 5 minutes.
I said 2, so I'm going to get
okay.
going. Steph, you ready?
So Cooper's non-binary and is 7 and is great, and we make jewelry together. Yeah. No, do you know that Cooper is Cooper?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Steph, are you ready? Yeah. Okay. All righty. We're going to get started now. Hope everyone has a comfortable seat. Good morning. My name is Andrea Kelton Harris, and on behalf of Dean Smith and the FAS HR Diversity Committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first dialogue of our fiscal year 18 series. We're so pleased that so many of you have decided to join us. I think this dialogue was oversubscribed, the quickest of any dialogue we've ever held. Within 18 hours, it was totally full. And so we realized there's a great interest and longing to hear from Professor Burt, and for us to all learn and grow together. So I also want to give a shout out to those of you who are watching us via YouTube, because we are live streaming, and we live stream through YouTube. We also have an overflow room, so welcome out there in cyberspace as well. And so this year our theme is storytelling to enhance inclusion. And storytelling is a vital part of our everyday lives. It's how we communicate, it's how we entertain each other, and how we express some of our deepest truths. It's through telling our stories. How many of you have heard about The Moth? Yeah, on NPR, a program focused on storytelling. Now, Harvard offers various courses on storytelling as well. I did a little search, and we offer a course on the art of storytelling, digital storytelling, the politics of storytelling, and even criminal justice reform and advocacy through storytelling. So storytelling is a wonderful tool that a lot of people are using to make changes in themselves, in our world, and to share with each other who we are. In diversity and inclusion circles, it's been heralded as one of the most viable tools that we can use to get to know each other. How so? It helps us learn more about each other. With each other, we learn more about each other. It can also help us to be more authentic in the workplace and in our lives, so we can bring our full selves to the workplace and be able to do the best that we can do as who we are. In her famous TED Talk, which has been viewed over 13 million times, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie shares how our lives and cultures are composed of many, many overlapping stories. She also goes further to tell us that she found her cultural voice through telling her story, and warns that if we only hear a single story about a person or a culture or a place, we risk some serious misunderstanding. So hearing each other's stories will help us better understand each other, and the better we understand each other, the better we'll be able to work together. By understanding and allowing our colleagues to be their true selves, we create a more open and inclusive and successful workplace. So to further this understanding, we've planned a series that includes today's speaker, Professor Stephanie Burt. We're so honored to have her with us. She's a tenured professor of English in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. She is the author of several published works of poetry and literary criticism, and is the co-poetry editor for The Nation. She's held in high esteem in many literary, academic, and LGBTQ circles. More about Professor Burt is in your program, so I'm going to step aside now and ask that we welcome her with a round of applause. Professor Burt.
Yikes. Hi. Thank you for Susurrus. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Sound check said, yeah. Thank you for devoting some of your morning and some of your workday to, I hope, having a conversation. It's not a dialogue if there are like 300 people, but it's a conversation with me, I guess, about things I do, and in particular about me being a trans woman. We're all a lot of things, right? I'm a lot of things. That's one or arguably three of them, but it's not all that I am, and everything that I am influences everything else that I am, and you're going to see how that works, I hope. But before I start telling any stories or talking about myself, which is still kind of uncomfortable, like I'm very used to standing in front of people and explaining at great length how to read Elizabeth Bishop, which I want everyone to do. Weirdly, more people are interested in me being a trans lady than in like learning how to read Bishop, which is, I want, you know, not my ideal world, but it's a good world for me. So thank you for listening. I'm gonna talk first in a way that's a little uncomfortable for me, but decreasingly so as I do it more and more, about my journey, as we say, my story, how I got to be where I am with regard to gender and self-presentation, and how I feel and how other people feel about that. And there's a little bit of medical information in there for people who are seeking it, and sort of what to do if someone you love is trans or non-binary. And I'm very happy to tell you more, and I'm especially happy to take questions and take interruptions. I love interruptions. Some of my colleagues who like teaching lecture classes don't like interruptions, which is fine. I like interruptions because I can get back on track if I have to, and they show me that someone is listening. And they help me move the room in the direction that other people want to go. And this is going to be a theme, actually. It's a theme of all my writing, maybe. How I feel and what I want to do about myself and who I am depends in part on a set of feedback loops about how I think you see me, how I think you can see me, whether I think you like what you're getting from me, and what you want from me. So not everyone feels like that, right? That's a certain personality type, maybe. Or maybe it's a little bit of everybody, it's a lot of me, but I really do care how people see me, and I care what you want from me, which also means I care to have you raise your hand and say, but wait a minute, or what does that word mean? So please, like, raise your hand and interrupt me as I talk. I've been asked to talk for like half an hour or so, and then read some poetry, and then we're gonna have some dialogue, is that right? Or is it 40 minutes? Andrea? 40, yeah. I can do that. So that's one thing, interrupt me. The other thing that needs to be said in a prefatory way is this is my story, right? Everybody's a lot of things. I'm a trans woman. I'm not just a college professor, but a professor in the English department at Harvard, and Harvard has decided to keep me. Thank you, Harvard. I hope I'm worthy of it. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, University Hall. I'm also a white Anglo person. I'm also someone who was raised in the bourgeois professional classes of the I-95 corridor. I went to very good private schools in Washington, D.C., where they tried their best to take care of me. And I was very safe in many ways from certain kinds of threats of violence and exclusion and resource deprivation that many trans people face, because many people face them, right? So I want to be really, really careful to say I'm speaking for me. My friends who are trans have mostly had some of the experiences I've had, but not others. And the farther you get from me demographically, the farther you get from major cities on the coast or in the upper Midwest, the farther you get, frankly, from Anglo-white privilege, the farther you get from the kind of demographics where families think of sending their kid to Harvard for undergrad. I was here undergrad. The farther you get from the kind of demographics where families think maybe our kid will go to Harvard is a realistic thing to think, the less the experience of other trans people resembles mine. I really want you to keep that in mind, because especially when people who are demographically like me talk about being trans, if we do it too fast or unselfconsciously, we're leaving people out, and we're perpetuating white supremacy, frankly, and I don't want to do that. But I can't speak about, well, I do speak about what's going on in other people's heads when I write about their work, because I'm a literary critic, but I don't want to tell somebody else's first-person story. I'm going to tell mine. And then move into literary criticism, because that's a lot more comfortable for me. But yeah, so it is conventional to tell the story of this. There's a stack of books here for a reason. It is conventional to use the term coming out for stories of growth and emergence and self-confidence and increasing visibility and sometimes increasing dateability for queer and trans people. There are trans people, and there especially have been in the past, who did not want to be identified as queer. I embrace the commonality. I'm a very queer person. I'm a woman married to a woman. I love women. I'm a queer person. For queer and trans people, coming out is a useful and a somewhat old label, but it's misleading because it sounds like there's one thing you do. And I came out to myself, really, and to friends and family and colleagues and literary communities in really 4 different stages. So there are 4 different stories I can tell, one after the other, about me getting to be who I am and to be comfortable, not just being on stage with a microphone, which frankly I think I've always been, but being on stage with a microphone in my physical body, rather than as a voice coming over the radio telling you that the Volcano Suns are a great forgotten Boston band. They're not really forgotten. Any Volcano Suns fans in here? Thank you. Yes. Hi. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. But I I've always been comfortable talking to people, but being comfortable in my physical body with how I look and what I'm wearing and how people see me as a 3D person in the world, that's kind of new. And how did I get there? It's really several stories. So the first story is of me coming out to myself and to close friends and to person I was dating in college, like here. And that's a story of me realizing that wishing that I were a girl a lot and disliking the male body that I grew up with and the male gender I was assigned wasn't just sort of some weird quirk of me that I had to deal with, but put me in a comprehensible category of people who could do something about it. As a teenager, right, and as a Harvard student for my first 3 years, I knew that there were gay and lesbian and trans people, and I had read something about trans people, and I thought that trans people were a discrete category of people who were going to kill ourselves sooner or later unless we got surgery. No. And I wasn't that, right? I've never been suicidal. I also did not always feel like I was already a girl, right? The classic narrative, not the first trans memoir, but the first one that has literary merit in English, as far as I know, is Jan Morris's book Conundrum, which is a very good book. It's also very dated now, as I think she knows. She's gone on to write other books about other things. And her story, which is the class trans woman narrative, is I always knew I was a girl inside. I always felt like I was already a girl. I was kidding myself. I tried to be hypermasculine and joined the British Army and climbed Mount Everest, which she did, and then realized, and then met the love of my life and got married and realized that we could stay together if I transitioned. So I transitioned right away, and here's the story of my surgery in Morocco. And so I didn't kill myself in middle age, and instead I'm Jan Morris. So that's her story, and that's not my story. So I was like, I can't do anything about this. And this isn't me. There's no category for me. And there's definitely no lesbian category for me. There's no queer category that includes me. And then Riot Girl happened. And then at the same time, the queer moment happened. If you're an Eve Sedgwick fan, any Eve Sedgwick fans in here? Yeah, thank you. Okay, not enough hands. Yeah, no, she's my favorite literary critic who's not primarily a poetry critic, although she did write poetry and write about it. And she wrote an essay called Queer and Now in the early 90s about the expansion of the queer label to include people like me. I know this is review for some of you, I'm sorry, but for some of you it's new. Sedgwick. And also an amazing essay called How to Bring Your Kids Up Gay, which some of you know. And I read these essays at the same time as I was listening to Bikini Kill and meeting people. Yeah. Oh, what is Riot Girl? Okay, the long answer to what is Riot Girl is my friend Sarah Marcus wrote a book called Girls to the Front that's a political and musical history of Riot Girl, and everyone should read it. She teaches at Notre Dame now. The short answer is this was a movement that connected teen girl feminism to pre-internet zine culture, where you find people you have stuff in common with through the mail, with stuff that you make yourself, to punk rock music. And the major Riot Girl band was Bikini Kill. It had implications for youth culture at the same time as Nirvana. Like, Smells Like Teen Spirit, the slogan, we know that song, was something that one of the members of Bikini Kill spray painted on Kurt Cobain's wall before it was a song. So this was connected to the birth of Nirvana and sort of indie rock becoming a large thing. And it was teen girl, queer positive, inclusive, anti-establishment, very loud, do-it-yourself, amateur feminism. And because it was, and I didn't feel like I could just go to Riot Girl meetings and like be part of this subculture because I was too old and I wasn't a girl yet. But I watched it and I went to the shows and I listened to it and I wrote about it and felt, oh, there's a queer culture that can include me where I can feel like a girl even if I'm not one. So that's part one, right, of me talking and saying, no, wait, this is me. Part two is the late 90s, where I talked about being trans with my friends, with more of my friends, and was in a social group where I got to present as female in party settings, in club settings, and clothes shopping. And that was great, but it was also special occasion, you know, cross-dressing, right? That term is sort of stigmatized. Because it implies that people who are doing it to get off, which people do, but it's technically accurate because I was presenting as female in certain contexts where my friends would understand it and we could go dancing. And that was fun. And I had met a couple of people at Yale and in New York where I was living who were either strongly considering transitioning or who were transitioning. And I also had more out gay and lesbian friends than I used to and felt like I knew what a queer community was. And I also felt like this was a huge medicalized step to take with my life, and I didn't think I wanted to because I was never been suicidal, I wasn't desperately unhappy. I was just like, there's this thing I'm trying to address about myself, which is gender, and I'm going to devote most of my energy to doing other stuff, like writing about poetry, right? And music writing and meeting people and reading novels. And I did that and it worked out pretty well. I got married to the love of my life, and the wedding was really wonderful, even though I had to present as male for it, because weddings are for you, but they're also for your family, right? Some of you remember that, right? Right? A large wedding with your family is a series of compromises. So we did that, and it was great. It was, I made a series of choices that were clearly the right choice for me at the time, and I feel that way very consistently. And it's uncomfortable for me to even be talking in this nonfiction memoir-y way, but that does seem important to say in this context, that I made the right series of choices for me, and for us, right, for my family. At the time, and that's the end of Act 2 of me coming out as trans. We moved to Minnesota. I got what I still feel like was the best first job in the country for an English professor at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Minnesota's great. And I just did other things, right? I presented as femme in like small ways. Like I was the professor who wears t-shirts and nail polish and never wears a tie, and like often wears nail polish, and was sort of visible to students who wanted to talk about queer culture and queer identity. And Macalester is a very queer-friendly place. But I felt about my body and my own gender that I was just busy doing other things, which was accurate. I was writing books. We started a family. I was figuring out how to be a grown-up professor instead of a graduate student. I was trying to be a loyal friend to different friends who had different needs. I was, going to rock shows sometimes. And we realized after 7 years in Minnesota that it was time to see whether we could move back to New England. And it turned out that Harvard wanted a poetry critic for some reason. And they picked me, and it worked out really well. Hi. So we came here, and I wrote more books about how to read poetry. And it turned out Harvard really wanted a poetry critic who could also do some stuff with science fiction on the side. I'll get back to that. Because the science fiction interacts with trans identity in a way I wouldn't have expected in the 90s. Because it wasn't as true in the 90s. But we moved here. I wrote more books. Harvard decided to keep me. We had a second child. We wanted 2 children, and now we have them, and they're amazing, and they're 7 and 11. And I'm trying. It's the child song. Yeah. And it got to be like 2011, and we had the family that we wanted to have, and I had the job that I wanted to have, and I had the sense of different senses of things being settled, and I realized I'd been running an experiment. And the experiment was, how long can I go, and how long can we go happily and be satisfied with the life that I have and the life that we have together, and also with my professional life in the literary community? How long can I go without being out as trans and without saying, look, everybody, I'm a girl inside, and I'm going to do something about it? And the results of that experiment were until about 2011. So, Act 3 of me coming out as trans was me beginning to write about feeling like a girl inside and feeling like I had 2 genders, which was the way I described myself, and figuring out how to find not just like LGBTQ friends, which I already had, wanted more, who doesn't want more friends, but spaces that were specifically for trans people, where I could figure out what, if anything, I wanted to do next, and being able to write openly and honestly in a way that belonged to the genre of the literary essay, or lyric prose, as sort of poetry world people say. So I started to write about feeling like a girl inside, and wrote a couple of essays on sort of having 2 genders and feeling uncomfortable being assigned male at birth and male-bodied and so on. And it sort of blew up really fast in a way that I think I was hoping for, although I wouldn't have put it that baldly at the time, because one of the small journal editors who published one of my essays about like being a girl inside happens to be Mark Oppenheimer, who's also a quite talented featured journalist who writes for things like the New York Times Magazine. So there was this piece in 2012 about me in the New York Times Magazine that called me poetry's cross-dressing kingmaker. That was what it said on the cover of the magazine. And I remember the process of doing that piece. And it was mostly fun. I like attention. I had to warn parents that this was happening. And it was really adorable. My parents are very, very generous, thoughtful people who want to do the right thing. And they want to do the right thing in a Jewish way if possible. They're going to love that this talk is at Hillel. Hi, Harvard Hillel. Thank you for hosting. Yeah. Yeah. But my mom was worried about the psychology of being trans and is it going to be okay? And, is it going to be okay for your kids? Which, if the subject is new to you, are totally appropriate worries to have. Spoiler alert, it's fine, we're great. My father, who has a career as a large firm lawyer, was concerned that this would hurt my career and be professionally a problem if people knew that poetry doesn't have a kingmaker. I'm a poetry critic. There are a bunch of us. There are a bunch of us here at Harvard. But that I'd be a worse poetry critic, or I'd get in trouble professionally, or Harvard wouldn't like me anymore, or I wouldn't sell books or something, or my students wouldn't like it if they knew that I was a girl inside. And that is really a live problem in a lot of fields, right? If you're in the national security field, for example, or if you're in certain academic fields, especially certain quantitative social sciences, even today, I hear stories that are just like, maybe you should call HR. None of the stories I've heard are from here. I'm not like calling out a Harvard department. But certainly there are fields where coming out as trans would make it really, really hard to get other things done interpersonally, socially, emotionally, professionally, intellectually. Literary studies in this decade is no longer such a field, or not where I live. And I just said, Dad, I'm an English professor. I have tenure at Harvard already. I'll be fine. This actually makes me more able to write what I want to write. I'll be fine. And that turned out to be true. But this profile showed up, and I was out as some flavor of trans to anyone who read the New York Times Magazine. And that was great, because I didn't have to call people and tell them. This is 2012, this is pre-Facebook, or almost pre-Facebook, right? I didn't have to tell people one by one. And honestly, the next few years were sort of what I expected in a good way. People asked me to write about being trans in prose, as well as to talk about and keep on writing like trans poetry. All my poetry is trans poetry in some sense, just as all of Yeats's poetry is Irish, but only some of it's about Ireland, right? All of Wordsworth's poetry is the bad example. All of Keats's poetry is English, right? But only some of it's about England. I kept on doing the writing I was doing, and I could do more of it. And it turned out that there was student demand at Harvard for trans visibility and for LGBTQ lit courses. I've taught an undergrad course that was LGBTQ lit, and it was actually very frustrating because people who take that course as an undergrad want realist novels and memoirs that show them what it's like to be and what it's been like to be these different varieties of queer people in history. And if I'm teaching a course, I want to fill it with like poetry and spaceships and trans people. And I did that, and it was really fun, but if you give people sonnets about being trans instead of memoirs about being trans, they say, what's a sonnet? And then you have to teach them what's a sonnet. So this was a frustrating course to teach, and we have other people who do queer lit courses in departments other than English who are great at doing this and who do novels and memoirs. And I taught this course again as a graduate course, and it was really fun. I'm going to do that again. But it opened up teaching opportunities. It opened up writing opportunities. It meant that I was part of a community visibly. And it meant I started getting email from people who said, I'm like you, what do I do? And sometimes I tried to give them advice, and sometimes I said, I don't know what you should do. I just Googled some resources in your community. And that, frankly, that was not a surprise. So that was me from 2012 to 2016. This is sort of Act 3, where my self-presentation was, I have two genders, and the term that we use is non-binary. And there are many people, including some of my close friends, who are really deeply non-binary. They either feel totally outside the gender system, or they feel like they're a boy and a girl, or a woman and a man. That is a stable feeling that is at the core of a lot of people, and if someone tells you they're non-binary and their pronouns are they, them, believe them, okay? And they, them as a singular pronoun has a long, rich history in the English language, and if you're not used to it, please get used to it. Other people, try being non-binary, or try being they, them, or try saying I reject gender entirely, or try saying I'm a boy and a girl, because they're not sure where they're going, and they're on their way to something else. And if you want to drive from Minneapolis to Philadelphia, you're probably going to go through Chicago. And you might really love Chicago and decide to stay there. But you're not going to ever get to Philly unless you go through Chicago. And I didn't know that I wasn't going to stay in Chicago, as it were. I'm doing Midwestern representation without intending to it. Yeah, hi, yes. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm not from the Midwest. And this matters about my relation to national politics. Danica Rome, everyone? Yeah. Yeah. But so I thought I was going to stay in Chicago, and then I realized, and I had help, and I had, advice, and I'm sort of an open book, but I try not to talk about my wife or our kids in forums like this, because their privacy is their privacy. But I can say that I've been totally, totally supported. And I knew I was going to be supported. When we realized that I was and am, much happier and look happier presenting as a woman. I pretty much write the same books, and I'm probably the same on the telephone, no matter what I'm wearing, but people noticed, right? She noticed, I noticed, that my, posture is different, and my facial expression is different, and my physical way of being in the world was different when I got to, wear dresses or wear tops that were obviously feminine, and wear earrings and makeup and present as a woman in the world rather than having to do something else. And I had all these reasons for trying to continue to be non-binary, but they weren't because that was how I felt inside, it turned out. They were out of convenience or fear of offending people or fear of putting myself above others. As many of you know, it takes longer, usually on average, for people who present as women to get ready in the morning than for people who present as men, usually, right? And we have 2 kids, and when I started coming out as trans as an adult, right, Act 3, one of them was 2. And I really sort of told myself, I can't be a woman every day at Harvard. I can't really do this because it would triple the amount of time it takes me to get ready in the morning, and I can't do that to our family. It would be selfish. That was how I felt. And I had other reasons. Of the people I knew early on who had done medical transition, some of them were people who had mood disorders, which the medical transition made clear. But I realized that actually we would be fine if I took longer to get ready in the morning. Our kids would still get to school when they were going to get to school, and I would be supported, and I could do this. And that sort of convenience and being a martyr was not a good enough reason to go on trying to be male Monday through Thursday or, at home, when I could actually be myself and be physically 3-dimensionally embodied in the world in the way that feels right to me, which I had always sort of wanted to do, and I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think it would be a good idea. I thought I would be fine not doing that, and I was fine until I wasn't. We ran the experiment. And this is an important thing, especially if you know other people who are coming out as anything, right? As non-binary, as trans guys, as trans women, as gay later in life. And if you read superhero comics, you need to be reading Iceman right now, because this is what Iceman is about. And it looks like a national periodical is letting me write about coming out as an adult in superhero comics, which I get to work on this evening. Anyway, read Iceman. See, I'm much more comfortable talking about literature. But I realized that maybe I could do this. And that's Act 4, and that's this year. And it turns out that doing medical transition to female, to fully female, right, female bodied, in your 40s, if you have the right doctors and decent health insurance, is very well understood and pretty safe. And people who do that and think it's causing a mood disorder should just go to their doctor and say, let's try something else. It turns out this is a very clear and understood and safe procedure, and that the social stuff, the sort of telling Harvard, hi, I'm a woman all the time, that's who I am, is time-consuming, but also, like, it's about time, and I've really felt welcomed. I've really felt like it's working. It's really working. Thank you to the larger community. And being a woman all the time is great. I've written about this in a book review, right? I'm much more comfortable writing about literature than talking about myself, which means writing about literature is my excuse to talk about myself. The Times Literary Supplement sent me a couple books about being trans because now that I'm out as trans, besides getting poetry to review and occasionally superhero comics and things with spaceships, I get trans memoirs. And one of the most personal direct pieces I've ever written in prose was a book review of 2 new British trans memoirs. And I got to sort of say explicitly what I'd been telling friends and what friends had frankly remarked, which is I stand up straighter and I see people more and I smile a lot more. Like, my default expression when I leave the house is smiling now. And I used to have a lot of happiness in my life that I still have. I had reasons to smile, right? I wasn't depressed. But I was anxious. My default expression of being in the world and walking down the street was... and I probably got some manic energy from the dysphoria that living as male caused, because I kept having to do things that would make me happy, because otherwise I was really uncomfortable. And I still do most of those things. If you're waiting for me to file a scholarly essay, I will file that essay. I am still writing those things. But I picked up probably some good work habits from being dysphoric, because I had to do stuff to make that go away. But it's amazing to have it not be there, to feel like, oh, I can just be for a few minutes at a time. And that's okay, because I'm not in the wrong body anymore. And that's kind of great. And I was, afraid to do that because I wasn't ready, and because I was afraid I would lose parts of my life that are really important to me. And it turns out, this year, weirdly, since I guess the country's getting better again, maybe. But my body and my life were getting better while the country was getting worse, and I felt guilty about it. But it really is better. It really is better. But it's also meant new sort of challenges for me. Challenges that I think I'm ready for, but I'm still thinking about them a lot. It's meant great stuff. It's meant, honestly, closer friendships. Mostly closer friendships with the friends that I've already had, but also making new friends. Jennifer Finney Boylan, who some of you know, who's a little bit older than me, who wrote a transition memoir in 2003 that was the one that I went to read when I realized that I wanted to think about transitioning and to really come out as trans. When I realized that Act 3 was starting, I went to Harvard Bookstore and bought She's Not There. And that's an interesting book. It's a little bit dated, at least the 2003 version is, because she felt so alone in transitioning. she was able to find community, but not the kind of queer and trans community that's out there now. But one thing that she says is being a man is a thing that men are taught to do alone, and being a woman is something that women learn to do together. I don't know whether that feeling is true as a piece of large-scale culture criticism, or whether it's true in the very restricted sense that trans women who are not out feel very alone, whereas trans women who are out as women feel like we can reach out to people. Cis men, especially straight cisgender men who write about masculinity, do talk about like being alone and having to like do things by yourself in the wilderness. So I don't think it's just about like me, but I definitely feel like I can be closer to people and trust people more. I'm more open. This has comic sides, and a sort of caution flag side. I hope this is the presentation you thought you were coming to hear. Yeah, yeah. The comic side is because I was raised with the kind of privilege that I was raised in, and because I'm me, I'm sort of a talky person, right? And it used to be that I would talk and talk and talk until I was interrupted or until I realized I was talking too much about, like, Wallace Stevens or Elizabeth Bishop or Ray Armantrout or D.A. Powell. Everybody should read D.A. Powell. Or Terrence Hayes, who is so good, or various poets, or James Tiptree Jr., who everyone should also read, or Iceman, which everyone should also read. If you read superhero comics. If you don't, that's fine, never mind. But I didn't talk about myself. And now I'm willing to talk about myself, but it also means I'm afraid of talking and talking and talking and not listening enough. And I need to think about not just social and emotional boundaries, but the kind of things that people in linguistics department study about conversational boundaries, right? Like when to stop, and when to listen, and when to shut up, and what's appropriate. And I'm sort of relearning that, but the new rules are way better than the old rules. Because I talk and talk and talk about myself, I'm more open about myself in a way that risks oversharing. I am now at risk of oversharing because of my transition. Right? When I was living as male, I was way at risk of oversharing about like how to read Wallace Stevens. And I still am, right? This is about being an effective classroom teacher. But I wasn't at risk of oversharing about my feelings. Does that help? I wouldn't use the word urge, but willingness. Willingness. Yeah. Right? Everybody, including me, has some set of feelings that you want to keep back, that you don't want to describe. But the percentage of my feelings that I want to keep back has dropped. And I think this has affected me as a writer. I think it's made me more willing to be more personal as a critic and to be more direct as a critic. Well, we'll see. But yeah, so that can produce comic oversharing, and I'm having to learn new social rules. I'm also having to learn new rules, which I hope I've learned most of them, about how to dress and how to look and about how to present my physical body now that I feel like the way that I want to look is mostly attainable. And I mostly love having learned those rules. And a lot of them are rules that I learned over 5 or 6 years now, rather than over like 1 year. I feel like it's a privilege that I get to wear earrings and lipstick every day. It doesn't feel like a privilege, it feels like a necessity that I have to learn how to do foundation without like streaks. If you identify as a woman and you don't have to wear a foundation when you appear in public, congratulations. I do, and I probably always will. And that was like a thing that I had to learn. But I think I'm okay at it. That actually interact with a medical transition. I'm going to back up a bit. When you meet someone you think might be trans or non-binary or genderqueer for the first time, don't ask about medical procedures. That's really rude. Do ask, what are your pronouns? You haven't asked, and I'm not going to tell you some medical things. But I will tell you that the single most important medicalized thing to me at this point, probably, the thing that I really needed to go get a doctor to do something about is the fact that as someone with a Y chromosome, I grow facial hair. And I'm very, very happy to have had Harvard's support in having a polite debate with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts over whether trans women should be covered by insurance for laser facial hair removal. My healthcare providers, physician, and like a trans people counselor, and people from Harvard wrote letters to Blue Cross Blue Shield explaining that facial hair zapping so that I could at least go out in the world with foundation and not have to reapply the foundation every 10 minutes or have children point at me and say, if that's a girl, why does she have a beard, right? That's not cosmetic. That's basic self-care. That is part of trans medical care. They did that for me. So we won for me, and now we're trying to generalize it. But that is a piece of trans women medical care information that is political and that is relevant and that I sort of wanted to share. That speaks back to something about how we're regarded generally, which is that for most of us, being able to live as a woman and be seen that way is super important. And genitals are kind of between us and our loved ones. One of the weird and damaging things until recently about coverage of trans people in mainstream media is the idea that trans medical care was about surgery. Right? When the dude in the White House tried to kick trans people out of our nation's armed services, which I believe he's currently been enjoined from doing, thank you, federal judiciary, his ridiculous excuse was surgery is expensive. I mean, he shouldn't be in the White House, but above and beyond that, that was the excuse that he wanted because he thought being trans was about surgery. Many of us seek surgery and have to pay for it. Some of us seek surgery and it's paid for by insurance. Some of us contemplate it in the future. Some of us are just like, no, that's not what it's about. Apologies to those of you who know this, but this does seem like an important trans education thing that doesn't come up in literature that much, so I'll say it here. When people talk about trans medical care, your brain shouldn't go to surgery unless you're a surgeon or a surgery nurse. Your brain should go to the availability of hormones. It should go to the availability and the cost effectiveness of minor cosmetic stuff so that people aren't constantly outed by having like giant jaws or breasts, right? For trans men, like top surgery is really important. It should go to the availability of appropriate mental health care. And of course, it should go to legal and social change. And now I can get back to talking about literature and about me. But that seemed important. So yeah, me and embodiment and presenting myself. I have friends I can ask about cosmetics. I have friends I can ask about things like bra fittings. I have friends who I can say, does this look good? Should I be wearing this? And that goes back 5 years or 15 years. That's not new, and that's great. And part of coming out at all, and especially this year, has been being willing to get a B+ in things. Being willing to wear something that looks okay on me. Being willing to do a self-presentation that I cared about that wasn't going to be perfect. And here we are in a Harvard building on the Harvard campus. We all know people who, if they do something, they have to get an A. A big change, at least it feels like that to me. It might not feel like that to people who know me. Maybe you think I'm just the same. But I'm much more willing to do a thing that I'm going to get a B+ in, where that's the best grade I can get. Because moving through the world and being perceived by others, and frankly being perceived by myself as female-bodied, as a woman, who's presenting as a woman, and as kind of a low femme woman. Like high femme means like heels every day and like serious makeup, and I can't do that, and I don't have the time. But I'm femme. I embrace things that are obviously girly. If they're relatively low maintenance, so low femme. And moving through the world in the low femme way that I want to present myself, I'm only ever going to get a B+ in it, at best. And I'm working for that B+. I'm pretty happy doing like lipstick, but not like eyeshadow on a normal working day. Maybe I'll learn how to do eyeshadow like more quickly in a way that works. But one thing, and this is the last embodiment cosmetics thing I'm going to get to, and then we're going to go back to literature. The one thing that means there's no way I'm getting an A in presenting as a woman is my hair. There's stuff you can do, some of which is the same stuff that cis straight men do to make your hair grow back. But there's a reason why I wear hats. We have spent a good deal of money on wigs. I have not yet found a wig that is me and that is comfortable and that I actually want to wear all the time. In the way that I'm pretty comfortable with hats. And if anybody knows a good source of like little cute caps and hats like this one that have like rosettes and butterflies on them that say this is a girly hat. Like I have about 4 and I rotate them, and some of them are just kind of like plain and go with this. But I really want more hats. And I recognize that this is kind of a B+ solution, but I think it looks okay, I don't know. And I mean, I hope that's funny, but the other thing you're seeing, and this is partly a thing I write about, a thing that is a topic for LitCrit and for my own poetry, and a thing that's specific to me and partly an aspect of human existence. Like, I do this a lot, but I think everyone does it a little. I check to see what other people think and how they are seeing me, how you are seeing me, because it affects how I see myself. If you don't think anyone else can see you in a certain way, you're going to have real trouble seeing yourself that way. If you want to be a thing, whether you think you can ever be that thing depends on whether you think other people will ever see you as a credible example of that thing. And this isn't just about gender. This is about other kinds of diversity and inclusion. It has obvious overlap with some disability movement stuff, and some stuff with people who who identify as neurodivergent. If you think people will always see you as something and you don't want to be that, but they're always going to see you as that thing, you're going to have real trouble convincing yourself you're not. And if you want to be something, you need to believe that other people can see you as that thing, which for some of us is really hard work. And for me at this point, it's kind of medium work. But it's really important for me to think other people are seeing me as who I am, which is a lot of things, but one of those things is a woman. I talked about Jan Morris and Jenny Boylan as 2 different generations of trans woman memoir. A thing that these memoirs, and some more recent trans memoir by trans men and trans women have in common is I always knew I was that thing inside. And I didn't, right? I always wanted to be a girl and hated being a boy and didn't want to be. And I remember being in middle school and knowing that if I couldn't be a successful singer-songwriter or terrific molecular biologist. I definitely wanted to be a writer. But I didn't want to write books for people who were just like me. I wanted to write books for the people among whom I wanted to be, the people that I wanted to write books for the people I wanted to be, and not for the person I already thought I was sort of stuck being. And a lot of that, when I remember, trying to write poetry and like writing science fiction and realizing I had no gift for narrative when I was 14, was not wanting to write books that would just be read by boys. Because it was wrong being a boy, but I didn't think I could do anything about it. So maybe even more than for some of us, my experience of being a girl or being a woman, because I am a grown-up now, has to do with feeling that that other people see me as verb tense is weird, see me as who I am becoming and who I've become, as doing what I've always wanted to do to finish becoming what I was going to be, and now am, I think, I hope. But it's not the same feeling as I already was. Why won't the world see? I just have to hatch. On Twitter, if you don't have a photograph or an icon or a picture that goes with your Twitter handle, they show an egg, or they used to show an egg. And if for some of us, egg is also like trans slang or argot for people who don't know they're trans or aren't out to themselves. And I never quite felt like an egg about to hatch, because I already had a life that was frustrating but good in a lot of ways. But I did feel like I needed to molt. I needed to become, and I'm still becoming, I mean, we're all becoming, right, who I wanted to be. But that's one reason why it's so important to me to have other people be in dialogue, right, with me, and to have people see me as who I want to be. And it's continuous with who I've been. Right? I've tried to write about this a little, and it's a subject not just for trans poetry, but for Wordsworth, for a lot of poetry. Who you are grows out of who you've been. My pronouns are she, her, hers. But I don't really get upset when people who've known me for 25 years occasionally call me by the pronouns I no longer want, because they have this continuous version of me in their heads, and that's how cognition works. I'm the same person, I'm just a lot happier. But when I'm misgendered by strangers, it sometimes makes me cry. Because if I meet someone for the first time, right, if it's like a barista, the courtesy title that they use for me tells me how I'm seen now. And it shouldn't matter that much, right? Like, why do I care whether the barista calls me ma'am or not? But I really care. I really care in this ridiculous, excessive way. It's a really big deal. I'm trying not to swear because children might watch this. It's a really big deal. Because the whole part of my brain that reacts to how people see me visually was just on hold or off the hook or unavailable for most of 40 plus years. The other parts were fine, but now I really care. And makeup tips are welcome. And seriously, if you know where I can get like cute little hats with rosettes, like I please. So yeah, and my internal monologue, we all have internal monologues in our heads. Like sometimes I misgender myself when I think about how people are going to react to a thing I want to write or a place I want to go. And I realize I'm still in the process of learning to be the person I'm becoming. Because we all have this habit of how we see ourselves that's derived from how other people see us and how other people think of us. And that brings me back to literature, which is not the last place I want to go. It's usually the first place I want to go. unless it's the Volcano Sons, who were really good. But so there is a tradition, there's the history of people being gender divergent, of people not fitting into the gender boxes of whatever their society is. You can find that, any anthropologists here? No. You can find that in every society. Sometimes it's honored, and sometimes it's not. People who identify as trans in the modern sense of, I live in a society with two genders, men and women. I was assigned the wrong one at birth, and now I'm 10 or 20 or 50, and I'd like to change that, right? That trans identity. That goes back almost 100 years, if you look at the written record. It's related to other kinds of gender divergent identities and same-sex desire. But that goes back, I think like 80 years or something. I'm not a historian. People writing about being trans in a literary way, people writing not about gender divergence and non-binary genders, goes back maybe to modernism, if you recognize people who seem like they're kind of transy now. Right? If you look for precedents, you can go back farther. In Milton, in Paradise Lost, the angels are non-binary. Some of you know this. Adam asks the angel Raphael, how do angels have sex? Milton, is patriarchal in a lot of ways, but he's also really sex positive. And Raphael assumes that angels can either sex assume or both. Like, if you're angelic, you're non-binary, you can just like have sex however you want. And Raphael turns red. Raphael blushes because this human, Adam, is asking them. So you can find trans-ish identities as far back as you want. But modern writing about being trans goes back maybe to Virginia Woolf's Orlando, or maybe to trans memoirs, maybe just to like Jan Morris if you're looking for ones that have beautiful prose. And the idea that there is a trans literary tradition in which people like me fit as writers is uncomfortable because it's connected to memoir, right? To telling the one true story of your life. Because trans memoirs are written for cis readers. Sorry, cis readers. I know some people in this audience identify as trans and some people identify as cis, and some may not be sure, and that's fine. Take as long as you need to figure it out, seriously. But the tradition of the trans memoir and of the realist novel with trans characters written by cis people are traditions of explaining us to people who aren't us. Does that mean I'm out of time? I'm almost done. Those are literary traditions of telling the one true story of who we are, as if there were just one true story that explained everything, as if a life were a narrative. Do I need to stop? Okay. Okay, it feels like the Academy Award ready to play you off. Okay, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Okay. So the tradition of translit that goes back to the 70s is, here is the one true story of my life because my life is unusual and other people might want to understand me by hearing my story. And there's nothing, well, there are things wrong with that. There are a lot of things right about it, and it's fine. But I don't feel like my life is one story any more than I feel like I am one thing. You're not one thing, you're not one thing, you're not one thing, you're not one thing, no one's one thing. One of the reasons I love working on poetry is that poems are ways of representing the self without having to tell one story. One of the reasons I love working on science fiction and like superhero comics and fantasy and all these non-realist genres, everything except horror, is that they're ways of telling stories that didn't and couldn't literally happen. They're ways of imagining things otherwise. And one of the great things about being a trans writer and a scholar and critic who writes about trans stuff now is that there are trans readers for out trans writers who can write with trans readers in mind. And partly in consequence, all of these kinds of writing have become available as trans writing that are not, I am going to tell my one true story so that cis people will understand me. There are still trans memoirs, especially by celebrities, actually. Like Janet Mock's memoir is fine, and that is very much like, here's how I got to be who I am. But people who are or want to be known primarily for being literary writers rather than for doing other things, people who want to do something other than tell their story to people who aren't them, have lots of literary space in which to work and in which to imagine readers, and I hope I haven't left any of the literary spaces that I've always been in. I feel welcome in all of them. But there are all of these literary spaces that I get to be in now that have just terrific, often early career writers in them. Charlie Jane Anders won a bunch of science fiction awards last year with All the Birds in the Sky, which some of you have read, I hope. Bear Bergman is a literary essayist who writes about transmasculine identity, who is just a terrific prose stylist and funny, and also writes about Jewish identity and fatherhood. YA novels written for teens. You can now write a novel about trans and non-binary and also related identities like intersex, which is a different thing, but related. You can write about all kinds of queer and trans and gender divergent topics primarily for teens and be writing for teens who identify that way instead of like for their troubled sisters, right? Meredith Russo's If I Was Your Girl is one sort of successful example. A number of books by Rachel Gold. The first one in a de facto series is a book called Being Emily, which is probably the first YA novel with a trans girl as a narrator, as a focal point, instead of like, my brother's my sister, what do I do? So Meredith Russo, Rachel Gold, lots of other YA people. Kirsten Crone Mills, Beautiful Music for Ugly Children, which is a very well done, very conventional YA novel about, conventional in a good sense, the way like Bach is conventional, or Mozart, about a trans boy in high school in like small-town Minnesota. Lots of stuff. Kate Bornstein, who I need you to know who she is. Started as kind of a memoirist and became an essayist about being a trans woman who is also non-binary, who's also a theater performer and director and writer for the stage, and has been an example for a lot of us that says just because you're a trans woman, you don't have to do exactly and be exactly what all cis women are. Not that all cis women are the same. So Kate Bornstein, whose writing career begins in the 80s and is almost predictive of what's going on now. Comics, lots of kinds of comics. Magdalena Visaggio's Kim and Kim, which is really fun. And literary fiction, challenging literary fiction for adults. This is a great novel, Imogen Binney's Nevada. It was the first time I read an adult novel with adult topics where I thought, oh, this is stuff that you wouldn't want young people reading. Partly because they do so many drugs, so much drugs. It renders queer and renders trans a lot of like beat novel tropes. And it's written for trans readers. It's by a trans woman, written for trans women to read. It's amazing. And finally, poetry. This is a very large and very important anthology of trans and genderqueer poetry and poetics. And I'm in it and sending my work to these people who were putting it together, Trace Peterson and T.C. Tolbert, was a big deal for me. It was the first time I outed myself as a trans poet. And the stuff that I wrote for the back of this anthology, because we all had to write little manifestos, is so dated now, because they thought I wasn't going to transition. And I didn't want my friends and family to get ready for me to say, okay, now my pronouns are she, her, and his, and I'm going to go to the doctor now, and like, you will see breast development. I didn't want to make people get ready for something I thought I wasn't going to do, so I was super defensive about like, oh, I don't think I'm going to transition, I'm non-binary, I'm they, here are some poems with my imaginary girl life. That was that was what I was doing back then. At the same time, it was this super important step in joining a literary community that was an out trans community, which I really want to be a responsible part of and help to make that flourish right now. Because being part of trans positive communities and understanding communities is one of the important ways in which I finally get to be all of myself. Thanks. Yeah. I think you've been promised that I'd read some poems, because there's a stack of books of poetry. Why don't we take a question, then I'll read a poem, then a question, then a poem. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. I have a microphone. I want to share my microphone. Metaphorically, but also literally. Hi. Yeah. Hi.
Very quick question. Hi. What do you mean when you say cis?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you know how before there were electric guitars, there were just like guitars? And once people had electric guitars, people started to call guitars without electricity acoustic guitars? Cisgender's like that. I'm transgender. If you're not transgender, if you're pretty comfortable with the gender that you were assigned at birth, then you are cisgender. And these terms come from chemistry, where they, where they have to do with, like if you have a square molecule and you have two methyl groups on it, if the methyl groups are on the same side of the molecule, then they're cis. And you would have like, I don't know, 1,2 methyl. Any chemists help? No, you could have like cis one trans fats, right? You've got a long chain at the center, and are the methyl groups or the ethyl groups or the phosphates on the same side of the molecule or on different sides. So the opposite of trans in chemistry is cis, so the opposite of trans in gender is cis, and cisgender means you're fine with the gender that people thought you were when you were one. Hi.
I'm not sure if this is the forum for this question. If it's not, we can talk later. But is Doctor Who trans? What do you think? What do you think about the new Doctor? Do you want to talk later?
No, I'm gonna. We have a lot to talk about, but not as much as I wish we had to talk about, because I'm not really a Whovian. Science fiction and science fiction fandom is a really important space for people to be trans, because you don't have to be who you are if you're in space. Especially now. Doctor Who is immortal and sort of omnipotent and keeps getting reincarnated in different bodies because he keeps getting played by the same actor. Sorry, it's the same character keeps getting played by different actors, because the series has been on the BBC for decades and decades and decades. And for that and other reasons, people who are really into Doctor Who sometimes have headcanon. You know the term headcanon? You do. The term headcanon. Oh, okay. Headcanon, if you are convinced if you're convinced that Tony Stark and Steve Rogers are lovers, which many people are, and when you read the comics or watch the Marvel movies, that's what you're seeing is them being lovers, then it's your headcanon that they're getting it on. A lot of people's headcanon is that Doctor Who is trans, because Doctor Who keeps changing bodies and is immortal and isn't really, and can be whatever. Yeah, that hasn't aired yet, though, right? No. Yeah, so if it's the same person and they presented as male and now they're presenting as female because it's a different actor, maybe they're trans. So I don't know. Because I like watching Doctor Who, but I haven't watched a lot of it. It's not one of my fandoms. I guess the answer is I hope so. No, this is actually. I'm glad that you brought up a sort of SF fandom thing. I could do this. I can do this with high culture poetry too. We can like do this with Elizabeth Bishop like all day. But there are like more people who care about Captain America than there are people who care about Elizabeth Bishop. So it comes up more often with comics fandoms and science fiction fandoms. Having a space that's not a space for realist literal narrative is really important to me, and that's part of me being trans. Even though the Doctor Who space is not a space that I do more than visit occasionally. Are you reading the new Silver Surfer comic? Silver Surfer comic. It's basically a Doctor Who story. A very helpful comic book store clerk was like, no, you need to read the new Silver Surfer comic because it's basically a Doctor Who story. The Silver Surfer finds a young companion, and then like they go on space adventures, and it's really funny. And it's all ages. It's all ages. If there are small people around you, they can read it too. Okay. Should I read a poem? Okay. Wait. There was a question, then poem. Hi.
Hi. How are you? Good. Thank you. We're thrilled to have you here. Thank you. Back to story number 2, when you said in 2011 you decided after 7 years it was time to make a broader change. Was there an event or catalyst or something that moved you in that direction, or was it time? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
So the question is, why did I decide it was time to come out as trans and try to live in 2 genders and write about it openly in prose in 2011 rather than in waiting longer or doing it earlier? So I'll give you the part of that question that I feel okay about answering, which is in retrospect, like I had tenure. Harvard needs to be okay, obviously, with all of the gender identities and sexualities that people who work for Harvard can have. I was glad earlier in my career that I didn't feel like I needed to come out as trans earlier, because I was busy doing other things that I hoped would get me tenure, right? And it would have been really emotionally and practically difficult, because there's only so many hours in a day and you've only got so much energy in your life. If I felt I needed to do the literary work, the writing work, the time energy, the just personal labor of coming out as trans at the same time as I was trying to be sure that I had my 4th book under contract and got scholarly articles off in time, I was really lucky that Harvard decided to keep me before I felt like I had to do this. I'll put it that way. And that's the part of that answer that I can give. Again, I didn't want to do this before I felt ready, you know? And if you have trans people in your life, which many of you probably do, respect when they feel ready. And that means if you have a student or you have a friend who's 25 or 55 who's I might come out as trans, but not tomorrow, respect that. It also means if you've got a 7-year-old in your life who's screaming about how he doesn't want to go to school in a dress, even though everybody thinks that he's a girl, respect that. And if you are a parent and you need resources for trans kids, talk to me. There are a lot of kids who really need their gender identity respected right away, who can't wait, who are so dysphoric, it screws up their pick a random grade, it really screws up 5th grade. And everybody deserves to be happy in 5th grade if they can, right? If you can. So if there's someone who's quite young and they're I need to do this, I need to be myself now, I need to be seen for who I am right now, respect that too. But I'm lucky in a lot of ways because I could wait.
So that leads me to a question. My grandson, he's 3.5. I mean, biologically, he presents as male biologically. I mean, I don't know the right words to say this, so please, educate me if I'm saying things. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'm willing to take the risk of saying the wrong thing just because I'm trying to understand how to have this conversation. I have 2 daughters, and not the mother of my grandson, but the aunt, was a gender studies major. So she's very clear about don't push particular gender, pronoun on my grandson as he present. But I get all confused and tongue-tied about, like, we're very supportive of letting him choose what toys he wants and all sorts of things like that. But just, you can hear him tripping over how to even talk about him. I'm using all the male pronouns. I mean, like, how do how to handle that? How to raise children to be allowed to make that choice for themselves, yet, without always using the they and the them and, whatever. And maybe that's okay. I don't know. That's my question.
Yeah. So that's like a couple questions at once, and they're all good questions. The first question is, what language should I use to refer to children who are gender divergent or who aren't sure themselves how they want to present and what category they want to be put in? And the answer there is use the they and the them. That's what the they and the them are there for. Some languages, like Persian, doesn't have gender for anything, not even pronouns. Do you speak Persian? No. Any Persian speakers? No. In English, we have a singular non-gender specific pronoun that can be used for generic people. If anybody goes to the store, they should really see if they've got any gooseberries, because gooseberries are delicious. And for individuals who are non-binary or not certain. So yeah, use the they and the them, get comfortable with it. That's actually the answer. There's a much larger question, which is, how do we treat children who seem to be gender divergent or who are figuring it out and who don't fit the very classic narrative of insistent, consistent, persistent, I need to present this way and not that way? And the answer is just ask them, and the more, this is true for adults too, the more people know that they're loved and welcomed, the more that they're going to think that misgendering and mistakes are just accidental and consequences of human cognition and not malicious or oblivious. And a lot of this is about getting educators on board, right? We have been very lucky to see in Belmont, where we live, educators who want to create a community where bullying doesn't happen and toxic misrecognition of children for any reason doesn't happen. For reasons about intellectual development, for reasons about visible disabilities, for reasons about gender, for reasons about can you play the violin yet or not, can you play basketball? There's really an anti-bullying stuff among educators, at least in some places, has worked. And if you're older than 15, I think everybody here is older than 15. I don't want to make assumptions. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, said the future is unevenly distributed. Right? The future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. The future of primary and middle grade education, and kids should be accepted. And teachers should and can stop kids from miscategorizing, being mean to other kids. That future is unevenly distributed, but we're seeing parts of it, and it's here. And so if you've got a preschooler, are they in preschool? Did they go to a group preschool? Are the teachers on board with this? Oh, you don't know? Yeah, that's this is a generic advice for parents of children. Yeah, but if you have gender divergent or arguably trans or otherwise, what box do they fit in, kids in your life, get the other adults in their life on board with this. And if they're not on board, find more adults. And if you are a parent or an educator for whom this is a live concern, talk to me, email me. It's totally doable. But it is confusing because we were all raised to think that 5-year-olds are he or she. And maybe they're not. Yeah. But gender stereotypes go so deep. It's not just trucks versus dolls. It's who's supposed to be assertive, what we expect of kids when, who's going to learn to cook when, what middle schoolers can babysit, right? And I think most people are cisgender. This affects cisgender people too. Thank you for asking. Should I read a poem? Yeah. So this is the book that I've been waiting to write. I really feel it's the last book that's going to say Stephen on the cover. If you buy it, I'll fix it so it says Steph, which is also my name. And it's got a bunch of poems about my actual childhood, a bunch of poems about my imagined girlhood, like the childhood that maybe if I were lucky I would have had or should have had. And it's got a bunch of poems spoken by inanimate objects and invertebrates and small mammals who are trans. And this is one of the first of that last group. Hermit crab. That shell is pretty, but that shell is too small for me. Each home is a hideout. Each home is a secret. Each home is a getaway under the same hot lamp, a means to a lateral move at low velocity. I live in a room in the room of a boy I barely see. Sometimes the boy and his talkative friends raise two warm hands and try to set me free, and I retreat into myself, hoping they place me back in my terrarium, and they do with disappointed alacrity. Scatter patterns in sand, adnates, cancellates, gaping whelk husks. A toy tractor trailer cracked and dinged beside the spine of a plastic tree. The helmet-shaped shelter of a shadow cast by a not quite buried wedge of pottery. If I have a body that's wholly my own, then it isn't mine. For a while, I was protected by what I pretended to be. Thank you so much, and special thanks to Andrea. It's 11:30. What are we supposed to do now? Am I supposed to sit here and hope that you'll buy books? I think I am. I'll sign it. I'll fix it. I'll fix the name.
We definitely will make time for that. What I want to do is close up the formal part of the program, and then we can move to that. So,
sure.
Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Ciotti, Associate Dean for FAS HR. And I just want to take a moment to just thank Professor Burt so much for being here today and sharing this story with us. That was one of our longest applauses, so I feel really good about that. You're so informative and so engaging. I don't think I moved in my seat once, and you were 100% authentic, which is very meaningful to the kind of community that we're trying to create. So thank you so much for really being part of this today. It means a lot. On behalf of Dean Smith and Leslie Kerwin, we get to stand up today and oh, well, no, you're We get to stand up and do this, given their tremendously essential support, both financially, both visibly. Leslie's sitting over there to the right, and it's you know, again, we can't say enough about that. On the back of your program, and later today, you're going to see some of the suggested reading that Professor Burt talked about today. And we have the coop here, and also see your programs for the books that are available for purchase today. I want to talk about, very briefly, just our next dialogue. We have our series for this year, just like every year's 3. And our next dialogue is going to be on February 8th, so please mark your calendars. We're going to be featuring Anthony Peterson, who's going to talk about truths about race with us. And WGBH's Callie Crossley, who's been with us before, is going to join him to explore social narratives about race in the 21st century. I think it's bound to be a good one, so please join us. On April 19th, we'll have Mike Robbins with us, an author and an expert in teamwork, leadership, emotional intelligence, who will share with us the importance of bringing our authentic selves to the workplace. And one quick moment. We have had these dialogues now. I think we're in our 7th or 8th year. And we often hear from folks who say this is fascinating and informative, but how do we translate that back to the workplace? And so we wanted to touch on that for a moment and say this one, as Professor Burt talked about, it's so important that you bring your authentic self to the workplace. So I would ask all of us, whatever level you are, whatever role you play, whatever department you're in, whatever you do, it's so important that you do that. And each of us not only need to do that, but we need to support every member of the community in doing that. So if you're going to take anything away from today, please take that as one thing. Last but not least, we're continuing our rally challenge. So listen closely to this because we've already given away several iPads. If you register for each dialogue, easy to do. If you attend each dialogue, you listen and learn, then you're going to be entered into a drawing for a prize. So stay with us. You're going to learn, you're going to be engaged, and you also may win an iPad at the end of the day. And we announced that prize at our 3rd dialogue. So a couple things. We were trying to figure out what to get you as a gift, and so we have a gift certificate for you, which I think you'll like. But we would have gotten you a hat. I mean, I have a great lead on some extremely adorable hats, and we'll talk after.
We need to talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a friend who started a business in just those things. So yes, for sure. Had I known, in any event.
It's okay. Would have been a lot of pressure, right? Because what if
Yes.
it didn't? It's possible to have a hat not fit you, right? That would have been
True.
super awkward.
Well, I'm going to get you those hats, and you can decide. So again, please stop by for these books that look wonderful. And we know how busy everybody is all day, every day at the FAS, and we're very grateful and very humbled that you've chosen to spend your time with us this morning. Last but not least, thank you to Andrea Kelton-Harris. You got to stand up.
Yeah.
You got to stand up. Keep standing. Keep standing. She brings an energy and a passion to all of this that wouldn't have been possible, without that. So thank you very much. And Annie McGough from the team. Where's Annie? Annie works tirelessly behind the scenes to make this all work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to the entire FAS HR Diversity Committee. So thank you again, folks. Go in peace.
Also the tech people, like microphone, camera people.
Oh, where's Anna McDonald? Anna McDonald's in green. Anna, thank you very much for all your work in coordinating Professor Burke. Anna, you should stand up too. And we had no tech issues at all. It was seamless. So the tech people, thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, a final thank you to Professor Burt. Really wonderful.